A black woman stood in the hallway, soaked not in water, but in history. Her silence carried generations of women who scrubbed floors, swallowed insults, and were told, "Know your place." Tonight, she wasn't invisible. Tonight, she was the storm their comfort never saw coming, and she had come to collect. They said the building never slept, but at 3:07 a.m., the only sound on the 42nd floor was the slap of a mop, and the silence after a grown man poured bleach onto the shoes of a woman whose name he never bothered to learn. She didn't flinch. She didn't curse. She kept cleaning. That was her crime. She made herself small enough to vanish. What no one knew, what no one imagined, was that beneath that gray uniform was the daughter of the company's founder. And she had seen enough. This wasn't a test of courage. This was an autopsy. When no one is watching, the truth about a place comes out like rot in old wood. And she came here not to clean floors, but to strip away illusion. Before the sun rose, she would reveal them all. She stood beneath the cold glare of the Carter Global Holdings Tower. A monolith of steel and glass glittered like it had nothing to hide. Manhattan's wind cut through her thrifted jacket, carrying the sour smell of late-night garbage and ambition gone stale. She didn't belong here, not in the way people thought. To them, she was just another cleaning woman in a city overflowing with them. Disposable, replaceable, silent. But they were wrong. A staffing agency didn't hire the woman standing there. She wasn't another faceless figure pushing a mop through polished lobbies. She was Zahara Carter, daughter of Solomon Carter, the man whose signature was etched into the cornerstone of the building now towering over her. And yet, she carried no name, status, or privilege tonight. Just a plastic badge that read Z. Brooks, a card of chemical-slicked rags, and the resolve that only grows in people who've seen dignity stolen up close. She stared at the glass doors, not with fear, but with memory. Memory of a different building, smaller, humbler. A diner on 145th Street in Harlem, where her mother had once wiped counters and swallowed insults like they were part of the shift. She remembered the way that white manager looked at her mother that night, not like a person, but a delay, an inconvenience. A thing. "Don't act like you're anything special," he had said, as Lorraine Carter mopped up a spill left by a never-tipped man. Zahara had been 9. She hadn't cried that night, though her mother had. Not visibly, not dramatically. Just a long silence in the dark, the kind of quiet only women who are too tired to weep understand. That silence echoed now, decades later, as Zahara reached for the janitor's access panel, swiping herself into a world that had no idea it was about to be exposed. She wasn't here to punish. Not yet. She was here to listen, to watch, to gather. Because there's something America has never been good at seeing, the truth of how it treats those it doesn't think it needs. The people clean your offices, serve your coffee, and watch your children. The people who walk past metal detectors with empty pockets and full hearts. The people whose silence you mistake for stupidity, whose patience you mistake for permission. Zahara stepped through the doors and was swallowed into a lobby of glass and gold, her sneakers making no sound on the marble floor. Security didn't even glance up. Executives bustled past, late-night meetings and Uber receipts in hand, too important to notice the woman who would later clean their fingerprints off glass doors they'd never hold open for her. But she saw them. She saw everything. And that's the thing about being invisible. Once you accept it and learn how to disappear inside a room, you can see what no one else can. By the time they looked her in the eyes again, if they ever did, she'd be sitting at the head of the table they thought she'd never reach. And they'd remember her not as the cleaner they ignored, but as the reckoning they never saw coming. They say legacy is something you inherit. But in the Carter family, legacy was something you earned. Zahara didn't wear her father's name like a crown. She wore it like a weight. Solomon Carter wasn't just a CEO. He was a builder, a barrier breaker, a black man who carved a financial empire out of concrete, code, and refusal. Refusal to conform, refusal to fail, refusal to forget where he came from. He had come from nothing. She had come from him. But that didn't mean she was ready. Her father knew it. She knew it too. "You've seen the top," he had told her one night, his voice tired in the way only old lions sound. "Now I need you to see the floor that holds it up." They were standing in his study, which had mahogany shelves, civil rights-era photographs, and a signed copy of Baldwin's The Fire Next Time. Behind him, the city's lights pulsed like a patient with a fading heartbeat. Zahara had just come back from Wharton, fresh off her MBA, fluent in finance, agile in data, fluent in corporate war speak. She planned to scale Carter Global's sustainable tech division in 8 quarters. Her father didn't ask for a pitch. He asked for the truth. "Tell me," he said, "do you know the name of the woman who cleans your floor every night?" Zahara blinked. "No." "That's the problem," he said. She could have argued, told him she wasn't entitled. She had interned in 4 departments for which she volunteered, donated, cared. But Solomon Carter didn't deal in optics. He dealt in roots. He didn't build Carter Global to hand it over to a woman who only knew the view from the top. He needed her to understand what it meant to work in the shadows, to be the hands behind the curtain. He needed her to see what power looked like when no one was pretending. And she had agreed. Not out of obligation, out of something older. Something that had been burning in her since she was 9 years old, sitting in that diner, watching her mother take humiliation on the chin for a paycheck that barely covered rent. This wasn't punishment. It wasn't a test. It was a return. To her name, to her purpose, to the floor. Now, walking the marble halls of a company that bore her bloodline but not yet her leadership, Zahara moved like a ghost. She had learned the routes of invisibility, which elevators service crews used, which executives never made eye contact, which faces tightened when brown skin entered the room with a broom instead of a briefcase. Every hallway whispered something, and she was listening now, not as a Carter, but as someone the world believed was beneath it. Soon they would learn. The floor they overlooked wasn't beneath them. It was what kept everything standing. The badge clipped to her chest read Z. Brooks. The uniform was a pale gray, synthetic, slightly too large. The shoes were stiff, non-slip soles made for endurance, not style. Her long hair, once her signature at every keynote she'd given, was tucked into a cheap nylon cap. Once manicured in soft, neutral tones, her fingernails were bare now, cut blunt and utilitarian. It wasn't just a disguise, it was a deletion. By 10:47 p.m., the executive floors of Carter Global were quiet enough to hear the hum of motion sensors. The building's pulse slowed after 9 p.m. like it was sleeping off the ego it carried during daylight. Zahara rolled her cleaning cart down the hallway with deliberate care. The wheels squeaked on the waxed floor, not enough to disturb, just enough to announce her in the way no one would notice. The scent of lemon disinfectant trailed behind her like the ghost of approval. She passed rows of frosted glass offices, names etched in chrome, titles etched in pride. Some still glowed from within. A few late-night stragglers typed furiously, wired on caffeine and ambition. None of them looked up. To them, she didn't exist. And Zahara felt it, like gravity pulling her into a version of the world she had only glimpsed through reports and policy briefings. This wasn't theory anymore. This was texture. This was the truth. At one point, a man brushed past her to exit an office, his phone pressed to his ear, and his voice sharp and loud. "She's asking for a raise? Tell her she should be grateful we didn't automate her department last quarter." He didn't see Zahara. Not really. He didn't pause or apologize for bumping her shoulder with his designer briefcase. She turned back slightly and noted the nameplate on the office door. Michael Trent, Senior Finance Lead. File that, she thought, quietly, without anger, without visible reaction. Another executive, female this time, emerged from a glass conference room, deep in a Bluetooth call. I swear, it's like these night staff multiply. Can't we schedule them later? It's weird having them around. Zahara didn't flinch. She just bent, wrung out her mop, and kept working. Because that's what they expected of her. That was the assignment. Fade, observe, absorb. It was surreal. The woman who once pitched $20 million impact investments in this building now wiping the fingerprints of men who didn't remember her face. But she didn't feel diminished. She felt sharpened, focused. Because she wasn't here for the performance, she was here for perspective. In this building, the truth was hiding under titles, behind smiles, buried in unspoken and unchecked behavior. And she would find it, not with confrontation, but with silence. Because silence, wielded wisely, becomes the most dangerous voice in the room. And tonight, the room belonged to her. He found her near the east elevator bank, mopping the corners most people never notice, the ones under the emergency phone and behind the recycling bins, the ones she was taught mattered only when ignored. Damon Cross, director of operations, didn't walk. He cut through the air. His shoes always gleamed, his tie never bent, his voice carried like authority laced with cologne. You missed a spot, he said flatly, not pointing, just staring down. Zahara followed his gaze. The marble was pristine. She looked back up, briefly, then down again. She knew the game. Didn't challenge. Didn't explain. Sorry, sir, she murmured. Since stepping into this new life, it was her first direct word to a supervisor. But Damon wasn't satisfied with an apology. Without warning, he kicked the mop bucket. The clang echoed down the hallway, startling a late-night intern 2 doors away. Water sloshed across the floor, filmy, gray, cold. It soaked Zahara's sneakers and splashed her pant legs. There, Damon said, his tone flat, almost amused. Now you've got something real to clean. Then he turned and walked off, whistling softly. Zahara stood there, her heart steady, not out of calm but calculation. She looked down at the mess, not just the water but the splash pattern and the streak of shoe print he left behind. It would dry in an hour, but the moment would stain. And so she recorded it. Not with her phone. Not yet. But in her body. In the ache behind her knee as she crouched to wipe up water she didn't spill. She carried like armor in the silence, in the reminder that people like Damon didn't see her, not even enough to fear her. That was their greatest mistake. She had heard about Damon Cross, a man with perfect quarterly reports and zero empathy. He was respected on paper but feared in practice. He was the kind of leader who praised metrics but discarded people. HR liked him because he was efficient. Legal liked him because he never left a trail. But Zahara didn't need a trail. She only needed the truth. And truth, in places like this, lived in moments like the one she just experienced. Quiet, unreported, undeniable. She wrung out the mop with both hands, jaw tight. Her hands, soft only weeks ago, now burned from bleach and friction. She finished the floor, not out of submission, out of control. Because power, when misunderstood, breeds cruelty. But power, when truly understood, becomes vision. And her vision was just beginning to sharpen. From that night forward, Damon became her shadow assignment. His roots, his patterns. His favorite time to inspect was the exact angle at which he tilted his head when judging cleanliness. She memorized them all, not to impress him, to dismantle him, silently, systematically. Because the first rule of absolute power is this: you never announce yourself. You let them underestimate you. to their downfall. By the end of her third night, Zahara's body no longer screamed. It whispered. The rawness in her hands had dulled to something constant but bearable. Her lower back ached in a quiet pulse, and the soles of her feet throbbed with the rhythm of repetition. She had begun to learn the choreography of the invisible: push, pause, wipe, step, bend, empty, repeat. But beneath the motions, something else was taking shape. A blueprint. The building's after-hours life was a different ecosystem, cleaner, colder, and less performative. Here, the hierarchy remained, but no one bothered to hide it. The pleasantries of daylight hours vanished like makeup washed off after a long day. She watched it all. The junior marketing exec left passive-aggressive notes for the janitors about dust buildup on the trophy shelf. The HR associate who snuck into supply closets with her manager after midnight. The IT guy dropped crumbs on his desk to see if they'd clean under the keyboard. They were careless with her presence because they didn't believe she was present, and that made her dangerous. Zahara had begun keeping mental tabs, names, habits, repeated offenses. She memorized floor schedules, noted camera blind spots, and identified which cleaning closets had obstructed views perfect for quiet recording if needed. She wasn't paranoid. She was methodical. Everything crashed. Each slight became a data point. Each insult is a breadcrumb. And she followed. One night, a young janitor named Rosa, maybe in her late 50s, with tired eyes and calloused hands, leaned over during a break and handed Zahara a bottle of hand cream without a word. Zahara met her gaze and nodded. No need to speak. That small act stayed with her longer than Damon's bucket or the slurs she overheard on the 44th floor. Because empathy here was as rare as oxygen, and it mattered when it appeared, even quietly. More than once, Zahara wondered how long these employees had tolerated this culture. How many of them had stories that were never told, or worse, told and ignored. This wasn't about one man or one insult anymore. It was about something systemic, something designed not just to exploit labor, but to erase its humanity. She thought of her mother. She thought of every unreported humiliation tucked under professionalism, every forced smile, every "yes, sir" tasted like rust. Zahara didn't flinch anymore when voices rose or laughter turned cruel. She just observed. Still, quiet, watchful, because the most dangerous person in any room isn't the loudest. It's the one with nothing to prove, nothing to defend, and everything to remember. And Zahara remembered everything. This wasn't suffering. This was intelligence gathering. And when the moment came, she wouldn't strike with anger. She'd strike with evidence. And they'd never see it coming, because they never saw her. It happened just after midnight, when the building felt more like a tomb than a temple. Zahara had been mopping the corridor outside the executive boardroom, polishing the floor with the same quiet diligence she applied to everything in this experiment. The hallway was still, and the air was cold. The soft sound of the mop against marble echoed like a whisper in a cathedral. Then she heard the click. Leather soles, deliberate steps. Damon. She didn't turn around. "Still here?" he said, his voice stretching out like boredom wearing a badge. "You people are persistent. I'll give you that." She kept moving, one smooth stroke of the mop after another. Damon walked past her cart, inspecting it like a general reviewing a soldier's weapon. Then, without warning, he stopped and extended his arm. With a slow, calculated motion, he knocked the entire cleaning cart over. Spray bottles spun. Rags scattered. The mop handle clattered across the marble and stopped at her feet. Zahara froze, not from fear, but precision. Damon looked at the wreckage, expression neutral, maybe even vaguely pleased. "Messy work," he said. "I hope you don't expect someone else to clean that up." Then, with the smallest smirks, he stepped through the puddle of fresh solution and left footprints on the portion she had just spent the last 40 minutes perfecting. He didn't look back. Didn't need to. The message had been sent. Zahara crouched slowly, gathering supplies with steady hands. Her fingers were wet and cold, and her breath fogged lightly in the chilled air. She said nothing, but inside her, a temperature was rising. Not rage, not despair, purpose. Because that moment, what Damon considered routine humiliation, was a critical entry in her ledger. A confirmation of everything she suspected. He wasn't reacting. He was performing and testing the boundaries of her silence, pushing to see how much power he could wield without consequence. And that's how rot spreads in places like this, not all at once, but bit by bit. Small abuses are normalized. Unchecked egos are mistaken for strength. Entire cultures are shaped by people who believe cruelty is just another management style. Zahara cleaned the floor again, but it was slower this time. Not because she was tired, but because she remembered every step Damon had taken and every inch his shoes had marked. The camera mounted in the hallway's corner missed sound, but it caught motion. It saw the shove, the cart, and the aftermath. That would be enough. She adjusted the bottles back into place, checked the mop, and refilled the bucket. No wasted movement, no wasted energy. Because in war, even the smallest gesture becomes a strategy. And make no mistake, this was a war. Not for control, for truth. And she had just survived her first ambush with her head high and evidence intact. Now she knew. The real dirt in this building had nothing to do with the floors, and she was done cleaning quietly. It was supposed to be a simple task, dusting the executive conference table before the morning rush. Zahara had just finished wiping the long mahogany surface, carefully removing the last smudge of fingerprint oil left by someone who had paced during a late-night call. The polish had dried to a perfect shine. Her reflection stared back at her. No name, no title, just resolve. Then came the voice. I was told this floor was handled already. She turned slowly. Jared Winston, Senior Director of Sales and Strategy, stood in the doorway holding a coffee cup that probably cost more than her entire week's paycheck under this disguise. He was dressed like charisma. Loose tie, designer glasses, effortless posture. To his team, he was the cool one who brought jokes to meetings and good vibes to quarterly updates. But Zahara had been watching. Jared's warmth only flowed upward. To those beneath him, it froze. He stepped further in, surveying the room like he owned its oxygen. This doesn't look clean to me, he said casually, sipping. Look at the corners. Zahara followed his gaze. There was nothing there. The floor was spotless. She had scrubbed it twice. Still, she nodded. I'll redo it. He smirked. That's what I like to hear. Responsive. She began wiping the same surface again, slowly and methodically. As she worked, Jared circled the room like a hawk, pretending to be a dove. You know, he said, his tone light. Back in the day, my mother used to say, if you're going to do a job, do it so well, they forget you're even there. He laughed softly. Zahara didn't. He moved to the room's far end and leaned over the table's edge. You missed a spot right here. He ran his finger along the polished wood, then held it up to the light as if examining for specks of dust. There was nothing on his finger. Start over, he said flatly, the warmth now gone. Zahara looked at the table, clean, gleaming, perfect. Still, she nodded again and wiped the surface for a third time. Good, he said, stepping closer than necessary. See? We're learning. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. And then, like it was part of a practiced routine, Jared tilted his coffee cup, just slightly, spilling a dark splash of espresso near the edge she had just polished. Oh no, he said, feigning concern. Clumsy me. He stepped back and watched her. Not the spill. Her. Zahara bent down again, cloth in hand, jaw tight, shoulders square. She cleaned it, not because it was her job, because he had just confirmed something. Cruelty didn't always shout. Sometimes it smiled, sometimes it performed, sometimes it dressed in tailored suits and delivered humiliation like mentorship. She stood when it was done. Jared smiled. "See you tomorrow." She didn't respond, but she was already writing the report, in her mind, her bones, and the blueprint of his reckoning, because people like Jared believed silence meant obedience. But in truth, it was the sound of the storm they never heard coming. The hallway outside the executive boardroom was empty. The lights dimmed, and the city outside pulsed like a heartbeat in the dark. Zahara was alone, wiping down the glass walls, her reflection warped in the polished surface, blurred, bent, and unrecognizable, even to herself. She didn't hear him come in. "Still working?" The voice was smooth, like always, but this time it landed differently. "Jared." She straightened slightly, nodded without turning. "Just finishing up." He stepped closer than necessary. Not threatening, not obvious. Just present. Too present. "I forgot my phone," he said, though he made no move to look for it. Instead, he wandered, hands in pockets, gaze trailing the room. "You know," he said after a pause, "you work hard, quiet, diligent. That doesn't go unnoticed." Zahara said nothing. He took a step closer. Just one. But in silence, inches feel like miles. "I've seen many people come and go in this place," he continued, voice dropping slightly. "Most don't last. They get tired, complain. You just get better." She kept her eyes on the glass. "Some people," he said slowly, "deserve opportunities." Now she turned, calmly, carefully. His eyes were kind, too kind, that brand of kindness that hides something colder underneath. "You have a name?" he asked, like it mattered now. "Janet," she said. The alias still fit in moments like these. He smiled. "Janet, that's nice." A long pause followed, the kind that holds a choice no one speaks out loud. He took a step toward her, not fast, not aggressive, but intentional. "You know, if you ever need help moving up," he said, his tone soft but pointed, "I could make a few calls." Zahara looked at him, just for a moment. Her eyes were steady. Her silence was louder than any rejection. And that was enough. He smiled, like nothing had happened, like it had all been perfectly ordinary. "Well," he said, clapping his hands lightly, "keep up the good work." Then he left. The door closed. Zahara exhaled, slowly, carefully, not out of fear, out of recognition. This was how it happened. Not with slamming doors or shouted threats, but with implication, with kindness twisted like a wire around your voice. She walked to the cleaning cart and retrieved her cloth. Her hands didn't shake. She had trained herself for this. In the reflection of the glass, her eyes met themselves again, no longer blurred, clear, focused. She carefully folded the cloth, turned toward the hallway, and began documenting what had just occurred, not in accusation, in truth. Because moments like these rarely have witnesses. But tonight, someone was watching. Her, herself, and soon, the world. And what Jared mistook for silence was only the inhale before the reckoning. She was still in the supply room, pretending to reorganize the shelves when the door creaked open. Rosa. The woman rarely spoke, nearly 60, skin weathered by bleach and disappointment, eyes that had seen too much and said too little. She moved like someone who knew her worth wouldn't be written in any report. Rosa glanced around, then stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "You all right, girl?" Her voice was low, like a hymn that refused to be extinguished. Zahara nodded. I'm fine. Rosa looked at her, long and hard. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small plastic jar of homemade hand balm, judging by the peeling label. Take this, she said. The soap here eats your skin. Zahara accepted it, wordless. Something about the gesture nearly undid her. Rosa leaned back against the metal shelf, arms crossed. You're not like the others. Zahara raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? You listen too much, watch too much. You walk like someone who's learning, not surviving. Zahara said nothing. She didn't need to. Rosa sighed, eyes far away now. I've seen 3 supervisors, 5 floor managers, and dozens of kids like Jared come and go, all smiles on camera, all poison behind doors. She paused. You think that one tonight was the first to offer a little favor for a shortcut? Zahara looked down. Rosa continued, voice tight. They think we don't matter, that we won't talk, that we need this too badly to make noise. She glanced at the door, then lowered her voice even more. I've seen women cry in this room, quit without notice. One girl didn't even come back for her final check, just vanished. Zahara clenched her fists. They get away with it because they know the company won't back us. HR's a photo op, safe space posters on the wall, but no safe place when things go wrong. Silence. Then Rosa looked Zahara in the eye. But you've got something different behind your eyes. Like you ain't just here to clean floors. Zahara met her gaze, steady. What if I told you I wasn't? Rosa didn't flinch, just nodded once, slowly. I figured. Another pause. Rosa stepped closer, eyes sharp now, not defeated, but ready. You came here for a reason, and whatever it is, don't stop. Don't get tired. Because if one of us makes it out and speaks loud enough, maybe the rest of us won't have to stay quiet forever. Zahara's throat tightened. She had prepared for resistance, for humiliation, even for danger. She hadn't prepared for solidarity. Not like this. Rosa turned to leave, hand on the doorknob. Oh, and Janet? Zahara looked up. Next time one of them tries something like tonight, don't just take it. Zahara nodded, voice steady. I won't. The door clicked shut behind Rosa, but something stayed. A crack in the darkness. A light. Not enough to see the end, but enough to keep going. The next night was colder. Zahara had started early, cleaning out the break room. Floor polished, counters scrubbed, trash replaced. She had just begun wiping down the tables when voices drifted in from the hallway. Jared's laugh came first, smooth, mocking. Then another voice, tighter, sharper, male, but different. Zahara froze, cloth in hand. Jared stepped into the room, coffee cup in hand, again. His smirk was already waiting for her. You missed a spot, he said, pointing to a corner with nothing wrong. Zahara glanced at it, then back at him. Still, she said nothing, just moved toward it. But the second voice followed into the room before she could bend down. Actually, no, she didn't. Both turned. Michael, mid-30s, head of data operations, known for being efficient, quiet, and non-political. He wasn't flashy, but tonight, something in his face was steel. Jared's smile faltered. Excuse me? He asked. Michael stepped forward, calm, even. I saw her clean this room 20 minutes ago. I was working in the hallway. That corner's fine. Jared chuckled awkwardly, trying to recover. Just having a little fun, Mike. Lighten up. Michael didn't smile. She's not here for your amusement. Zahara said nothing, but her eyes locked with Michael's for a second, and that was enough. Jared shifted, clearly annoyed now. All right, man. No need to get all noble about a cleaning lady. Michael's voice didn't rise, but it cut. She has a name. The silence in the room was sudden, sharp. Zahara could feel it. The shift. Jared scoffed, backed away slightly, muttered something under his breath, and left. Michael turned to her, still calm. "You okay?" Zahara nodded. "Yes, sir." He looked like he wanted to say more, but didn't. Instead, he offered a slight nod, almost a bow. "Some of us notice," he said quietly, "even when they think we don't." Then he walked out. Zahara stood frozen. Not because of fear, not because of shock, but because, for the first time since this began, someone had put words to her presence. Out loud. In front of power. It wasn't a rebellion. It wasn't a revolution. But it was resistance. And that's how change starts. With someone who decides they're done pretending not to see. She bent back down to finish the last corner. It was clean. But tonight, the floor wasn't the only thing being restored. Something else, too. Hope. That night, Zahara couldn't sleep. The floor had been cleaned, and the lights had been turned off, but in her mind, the building still buzzed with old echoes. She sat alone in the break room, the flicker of the vending machine light casting soft shadows on the linoleum floor. And just like that, the memory came back. It had been almost 20 years since. It was a rainy evening. Zahara, just 9, sat quietly in the small diner's corner booth on Malcolm X Boulevard. Her feet dangled off the edge of the seat, and her sneakers were wet from the puddles outside. Her mother was mopping the floor. Long shift. Almost closing time. The other workers had left. It was just her and the manager, a white man with a short temper and too much power over people who needed their jobs more than their dignity. "Faster," he snapped, glancing at his watch. "You're just a cleaner. Not like you've got anything more important to do." Zahara remembered the pause in her mother's hands. Not trembling, just still, silent. She didn't talk back. She just kept scrubbing. The man ranted about how people like her mother were lucky to have anything at all. Zahara watched from the booth. Something in her shifted that night. Something permanent. It wasn't just the words. It was the tone. How he looked at her mother was like she wasn't even there. The way her mother wiped tables with pride anyway, like she knew something that man never would. When they walked home that night, Zahara remembered how her mother held her hand tighter than usual. They didn't talk about what happened. They never needed to. In the present, Zahara's hand tightened around the cloth in her palm. This building was bigger than that diner. Cleaner. Louder. But the smell of condescension? That was the same. And so was the silence. The silence of people who think they're untouchable. Of systems built on forgetting who keeps the lights on and the floors gleaming. She stood, returned the cloth to the cart, and looked at her reflection in the break room window. "I'm not just here to expose them," she whispered. "I'm here to build something they never could. Not a company, a culture, where janitors weren't invisible. No child ever had to watch their mother be made small by someone with a title. No matter how rough, tired, or stained, every hand was treated with dignity. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about redemption. And she was ready. Zahara knew there wouldn't be a second chance. The humiliation, the whispers, the spilled coffee, and the silence in HR pointed to one truth. This wasn't just a toxic culture. It was a fortress designed to protect the powerful and erase the rest. So she stopped waiting and started recording. It began with a small voice recorder tucked behind the disinfectant bottle on her cleaning cart, no bigger than her thumb. No one checked. No one cared. It was just a janitor's stuff. But to Zahara, it was her first weapon. The second came the next night, a pinhole camera, disguised inside the broken zipper pull of her uniform. It didn't catch everything, but it didn't have to. Just enough. A moment here, a phrase there, a tone that couldn't be denied once replayed under fluorescent lights in a courtroom or a boardroom. She kept a digital log in her phone, hidden under a fake app labeled Shift Tracker. But every entry was a detailed log: time, date, floor, offender, witnesses, exact words, context, behavior. Like the time Jared whispered, "People like you should be grateful we even let you in here," when no one was watching. Or when Damon referred to the night crew as human lint in a hallway he thought was empty. Zahara never reacted. She catalogued. One by one she mapped the corridors of cruelty. But she wasn't reckless. Every movement was calculated, every camera placement timed, and every break room visit choreographed to avoid suspicion. This wasn't vengeance. This was evidence. She started noticing patterns. Jared only pushed boundaries when the floor was empty past 11 p.m. Damon became aggressive after any board meeting that didn't go his way. HR? Completely absent between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. A ghost shift with no accountability. And the worst part? Other workers saw it. They didn't stop it, but they saw it. She began documenting their reactions, too. Some laughed, some looked away, a few looked down, ashamed. But no one spoke up. Until Michael. Until Rosa. Zahara wasn't naive. Two voices didn't make a revolution. But they made a start, and a start was enough to keep her going. Late one night, as she sat alone in the janitor's closet reviewing footage from a hidden mic she'd placed behind the executive elevator panel, she heard it. Damon's voice. Clear, condescending, cold. If they had half a brain, they wouldn't be mopping floors at midnight. Followed by laughter. Jared's, Veronica's. It wasn't just disrespect. It was designed. And now, she had it. She closed her phone, slid it back into her sock, and stood. The building was still. But not for long. Zahara Carter had just shifted from witness to architect. Of a reckoning no one saw coming. The 38th floor had always been pristine, marble, brass, and cold ambition polished into every inch. It was Veronica Wells' domain, and everyone knew it. Tonight, Zahara had drawn the short straw, conference room detail. Veronica's meeting had just ended. She waited outside, cleaning the cart parked neatly against the wall, head down. The doors opened. Voices spilled out. Laughter, high heels, power in motion. Veronica was the last to exit. Impeccable. Hair in a razor-sharp bun, lipstick like war paint, blazer crisp enough to cut glass. She paused when she saw Zahara. Her gaze flicked downward. Up again. Assessing. Dismissing. "You there?" she said. Not hello. Not excuse me. Just command. Zahara stepped forward. "Yes, ma'am." Veronica gestured to the room behind her. "This place better not smell like bleach when I return in the morning. I expect it to be clean, not clinical." Zahara nodded. "Of course. And don't touch the touchscreens. You people have a habit of leaving smudges." Zahara said nothing, not because she agreed, but because she was memorizing the exact cadence of Veronica's voice. Cold, coated in civility, but with a blade underneath. Veronica stepped closer. "You know what your problem is?" she asked, tone almost casual. "You think just showing up and being quiet is enough." Zahara met her eyes carefully. Veronica's smile never reached her eyes. "Let me offer you advice. From one woman to another." Zahara said nothing. Veronica leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. "Don't mistake this building for a lifeline. It's not. It's a machine. And people like you, cleaners, temps, interns, you're not part of it. You're fuel." She stepped back. "Burn, quietly." Then she turned, heels clicking like a ticking clock, and disappeared down the hallway. Zahara stood still for a moment, not shocked, but sobered. She had expected disrespect. She hadn't expected elegance laced with poison. And yet, somehow, it made sense. Veronica was what happened when power forgot compassion. When women climbed the ladder and pulled it up behind them. Zahara walked into the conference room. The scent of coffee and perfume lingered. She took out her cloth, unfolded it carefully, and began wiping the glass tabletop. Each swipe was slow, deliberate, not to clean, to cool the fire rising in her chest. This wasn't just about Damon's cruelty or Jared's smugness. It was about the Veronica Wells of the world, women who should have known better, but chose power over justice. Zahara didn't flinch. She just cleaned. But now, her list had a new name at the top. And when the day of reckoning came, Veronica wouldn't be spared just because they shared a gender. She'd be held accountable. Because true sisterhood doesn't stay silent when one of us cleans blood from the blade. The office lounge on the 40th floor is usually deserted after 10 p.m., but tonight the light was still on. Zahara hadn't meant to overhear. She was collecting recycling from the corner bins, a routine, quiet, unnoticed. But as she rounded the corner, she heard it. Jared's voice, low, nervous. "I told you we can't push the numbers like that again. Accounting's already asking questions." Another voice, Damon's. "No one's watching accounting. HR runs interference. You let me worry about the paperwork." There was a pause. Then the metallic click of a USB drive passed from one hand to another. Zahara froze, just beyond the half-open doorway. Jared again. "And the Saxon contract? That leak put us behind 2 quarters. Damon laughed under his breath. "They'll catch up. By then we'll be gone, with more than severance." Zahara's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just harassment. It was theft, corporate espionage, betrayal at the highest level. She stepped back, quiet as dust, until she was in the dark again. She waited 5 full minutes before entering the lounge. They were gone. But the coffee cup Jared left behind still steamed. She walked to the window, heart hammering. The skyline blinked like a warning signal. This changed everything. If Zahara had any doubts before, they were gone now. This wasn't about bad behavior. This was rot, and it went deep. She reached into her pocket and opened her voice log app, spoke just above a whisper. Wednesday, 11:42 p.m., 40th floor lounge, confirmed. Unauthorized transfer of company financial data. Participants, Jared Winston, Damon Cross. Reference made to off-book deals with Saxon Industries. Evidence pending interception. She closed the app, saved the entry, then turned slowly to the lounge door. It looked the same, but nothing in this building would be the same again. Tomorrow, she would start a new list. Not just names, but crimes. And this time, she wouldn't just clean up the mess. She would expose it. 1 pixel, 1 file, 1 voice recording at a time. Because some stains, they weren't meant to be mopped. They were meant to be broadcast. The HR office was staged to feel warm. Faux plants, a You Matter poster in soft pastel font, and a jar of peppermint candies on the desk. But the warmth didn't reach the air. Karen Ross, Director of People Operations, smiled without showing her teeth. "Janet, right? Please, sit down." Zahara did. She held herself steady. Her uniform was spotless. Her face was composed, but inside her mind burned with everything she'd seen, heard, recorded. Karen folded her hands. "What brings you in?" Zahara took a quiet breath. "I wanted to report a pattern of behavior. I've experienced multiple incidents that I believe violate company policy. Harassment, verbal abuse, targeted intimidation, and potentially something more serious. Financial misconduct. Karen blinked slowly, nodding like she was listening. Zahara continued. I've documented several encounters with Mr. Jared Winston, Mr. Damon Cross, and others. I have audio, and I believe you need to be aware of. Karen raised a single hand, soft but firm. Janet, she said kindly, thank you for your honesty. A pause. But I think there's a little confusion about how things work here. Zahara blinked. Confusion? Karen leaned forward, her tone shifting slightly. You're part of a third-party cleaning service. Technically, you're not an employee of Williams Innovations, which means certain protocols don't apply in the same way. The words dropped like ice cubes into boiling water. Zahara stayed silent. Karen smiled again, softer now. I know it can be hard when we feel disrespected, but the best thing to do in these situations is to focus on the job, not personalize things. Some executives just have a strong communication style. Zahara's fingers curled on her lap. And as for financial concerns, Karen continued, those are far beyond your scope, but I appreciate your enthusiasm. Zahara stared at her. No anger, just clarity. This office was a trap, a buffer zone, built not to protect employees but to silence them. Karen stood, extending a hand across the desk. You're doing great work. Really. Zahara stood too, but she didn't shake that hand. Instead, she reached into her pocket, gently pressed stop on her phone's hidden recorder, and slid it back into her sock. Karen didn't notice. Have a good night, Karen said, looking at her monitor. Zahara turned and walked to the door, paused, turned back. You know, she said softly, where I come from, silence always speaks loudest. Karen looked up. Zahara's voice remained calm. I hope one day, when the truth comes out, someone records how you smiled through it. And with that, she left. She had gone in seeking help. She walked out with confirmation. There were no heroes behind these doors, only mirrors. And Zahara? She was done hoping they'd reflect anything good. The janitor's closet smelled of ammonia and resignation, but tonight it also held strategy. Zahara stood in front of a whiteboard she'd wiped clean hours ago. Now she filled it, quietly, methodically, with names. Not just the abusers, but the watchers, the silent ones, the maybe allies. Michael, quiet but firm. Rosa, wounded but awake. Carmen, the cafeteria worker who slipped her extra food when she looked tired. Jules, the night security guard who always lowered his voice when talking to cleaning staff. They weren't soldiers. Not yet. But they were cracks in the wall. She wasn't building a team. She was building a mirror. One that would show this company exactly what it had become. She circled the names. Dotted lines. Dashes. Notes. Who saw what? Who looked away? Who flinched? Who filmed? By the time the sun hinted at the horizon, she had created a living map of the company's culture, not the version on the website. The real one. The one soaked in silence, fear, and favor trading. She'd grown up watching her mother be dismissed, ignored, talked over. Zahara wouldn't just talk, she'd amplify. The next night, she approached Michael during his smoke break on the rooftop. The city glittered behind him like a promise it never intended to keep. Hey, she said quietly. He turned, surprised to see her. You okay? I am, she said, but I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. He nodded, expression unreadable. If you saw something wrong here, she said, really wrong, would you speak up? Michael didn't answer right away. When she finished, she stood in the middle of the hallway, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above. Then he flicked his cigarette hard over the edge. Yes. She studied his face. then handed him a folded note. "Read it when you're alone." Then she turned and walked away. He opened it 2 hours later. Inside were only 5 words. "Don't trust the silence here." Back in the closet, Zahara crossed Michael's name. Not off the list. Into the light. She looked at her web of names, arrows, and voices. They thought she was cleaning floors. She was cleaning rot. And when the storm hit, she'd know exactly who stood for what. What would you do if you were Michael? Would you risk your position to stand beside someone invisible, or stay quiet to protect your career? Tell us in the comments. It happened on a Thursday, the kind of night when everything felt still, even the dust. Zahara was working her usual shift, now following the building's breath. She had just finished sanitizing the executive restrooms and was restocking the paper towels when she heard it, sharp, angry, not shouting, whimpering. From down the hallway, she followed the sound slowly, cautiously, and turned the corner just in time to see Damon, towering, sneering, a new girl, maybe 19, too young to understand yet that silence wasn't safety. She was pressed against the wall, gripping her cart like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Zahara couldn't hear what he'd said. She didn't need to. The look on the girl's face said it all. Humiliation, fear, powerlessness. Damon stepped back with a smug half-smile, tapped the girl's cart with 2 fingers, and walked away like nothing had happened. Zahara stood frozen. The girl wiped her eyes, gathered herself, and returned to wiping the floor like it hadn't just cracked beneath her. It wasn't a slap. It wasn't water. It wasn't loud. But it was worse, because it was normal. And Zahara knew that was the most dangerous abuse of all, the kind that had been practiced so long it didn't even need to scream anymore. She walked over, slowly. The girl flinched. Zahara knelt beside her. "You okay?" The girl nodded too fast. Zahara handed her a cloth. "Take 5 minutes. Go to the storage closet. Breathe. I'll cover this hallway." The girl didn't speak, but her eyes said everything. Zahara watched her disappear down the corridor. Then she turned to the spot on the wall where Damon had stood. She pulled her phone out. She didn't record. She didn't need more proof. She needed a plan. She opened a private group folder she'd created a week ago, one no one knew about, not even Michael or Rosa. She titled the newest file, Phase 2, Activation. Inside, she began uploading audio files, screenshots, schedules, security camera timestamps, employee complaint logs, the few she could access, everything, one by one, slow, precise, like laying out weapons, not for war, for truth. The floor was spotless, but the air reeked of rot. She wasn't here to mop it anymore. She was here to burn it down and rebuild something worthy of those who had always been out of the light. This wasn't just about Damon, or Jared, or Veronica. It was about everyone who learned to survive the machine by becoming part of it. Zahara Carter had reached her threshold. No more documenting, no more enduring. From this moment forward, she was the storm. Zahara waited until 2:12 a.m. She knew Damon's routine was like clockwork by then. At exactly 2:10, he left the executive suite and took the private elevator to the garage for his midnight smoke. He always left his tablet charging in his office, unlocked. For 2 weeks, she hadn't dared touch it. Tonight, she would. She entered the office with her cart, quiet as a breath. The light on his tablet blinked softly. She closed the door, locked it, and began. She didn't need long. She knew what folder to open. She'd seen the names of documents before from across the room. All she needed now was a flash drive and 90 seconds. Her hands didn't shake. Inside the folder, Budget Reallocation, Facilities, Edited. Vendor Payments, External Transfers, Saxon Feedback, Internal Comments, Night Staff Records, Suppressed Reports. She copied them all. As she worked, her eye caught a single open email thread. She didn't mean to look, but what she read stopped her. It was from Damon to Veronica. Subject line: her. He wasn't talking about a janitor. He was talking about Zahara, and he didn't know who she was, but he sensed something. I don't trust the new girl. She's too quiet, too observant. Reminds me of someone we lost control of years ago. If she steps out of line, clean it up. You know what I mean. Then Zahara took a folded paper from her pocket, placed it gently on Veronica's desk. Veronica didn't touch it. What's this? A complaint? Zahara met her eyes. A preview. Veronica unfolded it. What she saw made her color drain just slightly. A screenshot. Her email exchange with Damon. If she steps out of line, clean it up. Her fingers curled around the paper. You're bluffing. Zahara leaned forward, just enough to make her presence undeniable. There's a drive. It's timed. If anything happens to me or anyone else, it all goes public. Veronica's eyes darkened. That would be corporate suicide. No, Zahara said. What you've done is suicide. I'm just holding up the mirror. Veronica stood, the corner of her mouth twitching. You think you can scare me with this street-level drama? No, Zahara said, turning back toward the glass wall. But I can end you with your own words. As she pushed her cart toward the door, Veronica called out, You're not as invisible as you think. Zahara paused at the threshold. No, she said. Not anymore. And neither are you. Then she walked out, leaving the scent of ammonia and exposure behind her. Outside the office, the hallway hummed quietly. But something had changed. The queen behind the glass was cracking. And Zahara, she wasn't done yet. Monday morning began too quietly. The lobby of Williams Innovations, usually humming with polished shoes and polite smiles, felt stiff and brittle, like the air was holding its breath. Zahara arrived in uniform, just like every other day, but something had shifted. People looked up longer and looked away faster. She pushed her cart toward the executive floor, each hallway colder than the last. It started at 10:06 a.m. A flurry of pings rippled through inboxes across departments. The subject line was simple. Urgent. Anonymous report attached. Inside the email, a folder of redacted files. Audio clips, screenshots, budget anomalies. All anonymized. But damning. No signature, no explanation. Just the truth. Raw and traceable. Zahara didn't send it. The drive did. It had triggered automatically. Someone, maybe Damon, had touched the wrong file too soon. The leak had begun. By 10:23 a.m., the first meeting was canceled. By 10:35 a.m., Veronica walked down the hallway with clipped steps, flanked by two assistants. Her eyes didn't scan. Her heels struck sharper than usual. Zahara passed her in the hallway. For the first time, Veronica didn't speak. She didn't dare. Inside the elevator, two junior execs whispered too loudly. Did you read the part about Jared? The recordings? It can't be real, can it? It's his voice, man. Crystal clear. I heard there's more. Like, more's coming. Zahara stood behind them, silent, still, invisible, again. But this time, she chose it. By 11 o'clock a.m., Karen Ross from HR had closed her door. By 11:15 a.m., IT security was seen moving through the finance floor. By noon, a few mid-level managers had slipped out for off-site lunches that looked more like planned exits. The building was reacting, slowly but unmistakably, like a beehive after someone lifted the lid. Zahara returned to the janitor's closet around 12:30. Rosa was folding fresh clothes. She looked up, her brow furrowed. You feel that? She asked. Zahara nodded. Something cracked. Rosa didn't smile. She just exhaled long and low. Been waiting 20 years for someone to shake this place. Zahara looked at her. Are you still willing to stand when it breaks? Rosa met her eyes, fierce for the first time. I've been standing, just needed someone to strike the first match. They didn't need more words, only readiness. Outside, the building still gleamed, but inside, the foundations were groaning, and the noise behind the closed doors, that wasn't confusion. It was fear. The notice came at 2:17 p.m., an emergency executive meeting. Attendance mandatory, no agenda given. Rumors had already spread like wildfire. Floors buzzed with quiet panic. Slack channels went dead. Printer rooms were suddenly packed with tense silence and blank stares. Zahara moved through it all unnoticed. She pushed her cart toward the 42nd floor boardroom, her steps slow and deliberate. Outside the conference room's glass wall, she watched the arrivals. Damon, expression stiff, jaw tight. Jared, sweating through his collar. Karen, fumbling with her tablet. Veronica, still poised, but her eyes no longer scanned the room. They searched it. Michael walked past Zahara and gave a near imperceptible nod. Rosa wasn't far behind, holding a clipboard she didn't need. They were watching, waiting. Inside the boardroom, Robert Williams entered last. He was the founder, Zahara's father, and the man no one dared speak above in this building. He said nothing, simply stood at the head of the table and waited for silence. It felt like a guillotine. Outside, Zahara continued wiping the glass door, eyes down, but ears open. Inside, her name was about to be mentioned, but not as Janet, as Zahara Carter. The room didn't know it yet, but the next hour would reshape the soul of the company. And Zahara? She didn't need a seat at the table. Not yet, because in less than 10 minutes, the mop would drop, and the mask would come off. The boardroom air was thick with tension, the kind that settles just before something irreversible is said. Robert Williams remained standing, his fingers resting on the edge of the polished walnut table. We have a problem, he said quietly, a problem that began with culture and ends with criminal behavior. Eyes darted, chairs shifted. Over the past several weeks, he continued, a covert audit has been conducted, not by lawyers, not by consultants, by someone you all overlooked. The door opened, softly, and Zahara entered. She still wore the janitor's uniform, but this time there was no cart, no gloves, just presence. Veronica stood half up from her chair. What is she doing? She, Robert interrupted, is Zahara Carter, my daughter, my successor, and your silent witness. Silence shattered. Damon's mouth fell open. Jared blanched. Karen dropped her pen. Zahara stepped forward. She laid down the files one by one. Audio, photos, and emails. They were all time-stamped and sourced. There was no speculation, only truth. You spoke freely around me, she said calmly. You touched. You mocked. You stole. Because you believed I was no one. She looked at each of them. And that's the rot at the center of this company. You don't fear what's beneath you. You forget it breathes. Robert placed a hand on Zahara's shoulder. She didn't go undercover to play a game, he said. She did it to see who deserves to stay. And then he looked around the table, voice sharper. Some of you will not. The boardroom was silent, but the reckoning had begun. The projector clicked. On the screen, a still image appeared. Damon Cross, smiling in an office, time-stamped 2:13 a.m., water mid-air as it poured from a cup, directly onto Zahara. Next slide, Jared's voice overlaid on security footage. I don't want to see a single streak when I return. His coffee was dripping onto the floor she'd just cleaned. Then, Karen Ross recorded the audio in her HR office. You're just a cleaner. You should know your place. Voice gentle, tone weaponized. Veronica didn't flinch when her email appeared. She had no more masks to wear. Zahara didn't narrate. She let the silence do it. The board turned to look at those beside it, one by one. Power was evaporating in real time. Robert cleared his throat. "Mr. Cross," he began, "you're terminated immediately for workplace harassment and hostile behavior. Legal will be in contact. Security will escort you out." Damon stood, reflex, outrage rising. But it deflated when two security guards opened the door without a word. "Jared Winston," Robert continued, "terminated for willful misconduct, abusive practices, and manipulation of facilities' budgets. Your actions are now part of a federal inquiry." Jared's chair creaked as he sank back down. "Karen Ross, you presided over silence. You upheld a culture of dismissal. Effective immediately, you are relieved of all responsibilities." Karen whispered, "I was just following policy." "You wrote the policy," Zahara replied, voice even. Finally, Robert turned to Veronica. She looked straight ahead. "You sabotaged the very principles this company was built on. You cultivated fear in the name of performance. But fear isn't leadership." A pause. "Your resignation is expected by the end of the day, or you'll be removed with cause." No response. Only breathe. Only justice. The room sat frozen. But Zahara? She was already looking ahead, because there was still one more scene to write. It was quiet in the boardroom once more. But this time it was not fear. It was relief. A long overdue exhale. Zahara stood at the head of the table where her father once sat, but not in uniform, not as Janet. As Zahara Carter, CEO, survivor, restorer. She looked around the table, and then to the glass wall beyond. Below, the city buzzed, but inside, it was still. "This company," she said, her voice steady, "was born from sweat. My father built it brick by brick, not from strategy, but from service, from knowing every name on every badge, from understanding that the janitor's hands were as vital as the engineer's."
She paused. "For too long we forgot that."
Zahara stepped aside. The screen behind her now displayed a new slide. Culture reset, from fear to fairness. Our values are not words on a wall. They lived by how we treat the quietest voice in the room. Starting today, every employee, no matter the badge, the title, the task, has a voice. Her eyes scanned Rosa, Michael, the remaining leadership, and new faces joining the table. In the next 30 days, every department will undergo retraining not just in process, but in principle. Anonymous reporting will go public-facing. Internal audit will run monthly, not quarterly. And wages for our hourly teams are going up. A beat. And for those who chose silence when they saw injustice, you will have a chance to earn your redemption. Through action. Through allyship. There was no applause, just stillness. Then Michael stood, quietly. So did Rosa. Then one by one, those still seated rose to their feet, not out of tradition, but out of recognition. Zahara didn't bow. She didn't smile. She simply nodded and walked out of the boardroom. Down the hall she once scrubbed. Through the glass doors she used to clean. Into a new morning, where no one would ever again mistake quietness for weakness. Zahara didn't rise because she shouted louder. She rose because she listened deeper, stood longer, and chose truth when silence was safer. Her story reminds us, what defines you isn't your title, but how you treat those with none. Respect isn't a policy, it's a choice. If this story stirred something in you, don't scroll past it. Share it. Talk about it. And in the comments, tell us, what would you have done if no one was watching? Because maybe, just maybe, someone is. For more stories that challenge, awaken, and inspire, subscribe to our channel. There's more to come, and it might just be the story that changes everything. Thank you for listening. Wishing you clarity, courage, and compassion.